Hello, and welcome to Chapter 4. In this segment, we're going to talk about neo-analytic theory, which would mean those theorists who followed the Freudian psychoanalytic perspective and expanded on it, and then the ego aspects of personality. So it's going to be building on Freud's concept of the ego as the rational primary part of our personality, or primary known part of our personality. All right, well, let's go ahead and dive in. Obviously, I'm hoping you've already listened to my chapter on Freud, because a lot of what I'm going to say about his followers will be how they differ from Freud. So it's important to sort of know what Freud said. Karen Horney founded a school of thought called social psychoanalysis. So right off, she's adopting Freudian psychoanalysis as the basis of her theory. But she's going to emphasize social factors rather than the sexual factors that Freud focused on. So her argument is that our personalities are due to us seeking self-realization. So self-realization is her term for how we are trying to make sure that we're finding ourselves, right? Living in a way that is consistent with our true selves. So she described the feminine personality as characteristics that emerge because of the social inequalities that exist between males and females. And she said, unlike her, mentor Freud, she didn't think it was strictly because females don't have penises, right? Freud came up with the idea of penis envy to explain how women might strive for similar power or status or decision-making capability as men have, and he called that penis envy, that they should, basically know their place. Horney disagreed with that, surprisingly enough. She said it's not that the women are asking for something that really only people with penises should be able to ask for, but that women's personalities are a reflection of the fact that people expect less of them and that they don't have the same opportunities as men have. So it's about the social situation, not about anatomy for her. If there's any kind of envy going on at all, she says it's not envy of the penis, but it's envy of status. Having the opportunity to, choose your path in life and earn a living and, all the, sort of status related things that go along with that. That women are longing for masculine privileges, not for their anatomy. So it's really, it might sound dumb, could Freud have really thought it was all about anatomy? But apparently he was really adamant that the penis was really honestly what was missing, and that what women were, that some women who didn't know their place, were really striving for. They wanted the power that the penis gave them rather than just, longing for equal status, even though people have different, genitals. She talked about aggression and anxiety, which Freud talked about a lot, right? He thought that, half of your, psychic energy comes from sort of this aggression place, and that a lot of our malfunctions are due to, anxiety bubbling up from the unconscious. She said aggression and anxiety both come from social forces, not from these unconscious, psychic energy sources, and not from, trying to keep things repressed. She said, the social situation where that you're not going to be respected, or that you're not going to be given the same opportunities, those factors can trigger frustration, which then can lead to aggression, can trigger anxiety as one realizes that no matter what they're going to do, they're going to be held back, and those kinds of things. So she was talking strictly about, males versus females, and why females tend to display personality traits that Freud described as typically female behaviors. She said, well, it's not about the penis, it's about the social situation. All right, so here's her basic flow in her theory. She says that we all have what she called neurotic needs. These are maladaptive behavior patterns that we adopt to help us to cope with insecurity. She says that the insecurity, ultimately, if you keep going back, well, where did it start? Where did it start? You're ultimately going to go back to early on. Every child has a belief that their parents don't really love them as people, that they just have to love them or they just have to take care of them, and that really, honestly, I'm not lovable. She says it all distills down to this basic feeling of insecurity in their parents' love. And that's what fuels neurotic needs. So again, it's a social thing. It's not about some kind of unconscious, battle going on behind your back, like Freud says. She says it's, this insecurity that started in childhood when we all thought that our parents didn't really love us, that our parents really would throw us out or other things. She introduced two basic qualities, basic anxiety and basic hostility. Basic anxiety is when we feel isolated and helpless in a hostile world. And so she described basic anxiety as just sort of this feeling of just, overarching sort of nervousness, tension, a feeling that something bad is going to happen, but you don't quite know what it is. And she says that comes from feeling isolated and helpless in a hostile world. I'm recording this in March of 2022, and I'm thinking anybody who's listening to me probably has to be thinking, well, that sounds familiar, right? We've had a very hostile world for the past, minimum 2 years, maybe even longer, right? And that a lot of us through COVID really started feeling isolated and started feeling very helpless. I know in 2020, I had a really bad batch of, helpless feelings where, you can't even make your own decisions anymore as a full grown adult. You can't decide if you leave your house or not. You can't decide if you cover your face or like, you couldn't decide anything, and it makes you feel very helpless. And, so I think you guys can probably relate to this concept of basic anxiety that she's describing. Basic hostility, she says, stems from anger towards our parents, right? That maybe because we have this sense that they never really loved us and stuff like that, we harbor some animosity, some anger toward our parents. But we can't really express that anger because we're afraid that if we were to tell our parents how we feel, that all of our worst fears of them, not really loving us and then casting us out and all these things will really come to fruition. And so this basic hostility gets sort of buried, and then it can come out towards other people and in other situations and things like that. So you got the basic anxiety, you've got the basic hostility. Neurotics are people who focus on very few needs throughout their life. Like they get very focused on the neurotic needs, right? So they're trying to deal with this basic sense of insecurity, and that is like their primary focus. Whereas a person who's not as bound up in the neurotic needs will have lots of needs throughout their life. Like they're going to have times when they need platonic friendship. They're going to need sexual relationships. They're going to need paying relationships called work, and they're going to need there's like all these different needs that on average people will experience throughout their lives. A person who she would characterize as neurotic is a person who's really just overly focused on, one or two needs. And a lot of times these are needs that can't be resolved, right? If your basic need is to feel secure in a love relationship, but underneath all of that, you basically feel that you're so unlovable that your own parents don't love you enough. You can imagine how this is going to be a fruitless striving for the kind of relationship that will make you feel whole. And so you focus over and over and over again with different people trying to fulfill that need, right? To have that kind of secure love relationship. People who are neurotic, as she would describe them, are people who have unrealistically low self-esteem, where they beat up on themselves too much. The average person, an average person who's not depressed, an average person who's going through life, tends to have an unrealistically high self-esteem. They tend to think better of themselves than the data would support. They think that they're funnier than they are, that they're better drivers than they really are, that, that people like that more people like them at a level than other people do. Like they really think on average, good things about themselves, and that helps to keep us from getting depressed and stuff. A person who's neurotic, according to Horney, has the reverse problem. Even though the data supports them feeling better about themselves, they have a lot of difficulty with that. They have this unrealistically low self-esteem. All right, so she introduced this concept of an idealized self that we all carry around with us. And particularly people who are neurotics, as she would describe them, do. But I think all of us probably carry an idealized self around with us. For a neurotic, they create an unrealistically optimistic self-image, an unrealistic image of what they should be like. again, this might be something that sounds super familiar in the modern era, that, this is one of the big problems with social media, is that we oftentimes get on there and compare ourselves to people who we think that's what their life is really like, when, of course, these are curated pictures that they've chosen to put up. And I'm not even talking about like internet famous people. I'm talking about, our own friends who are posting their Instagram photos. And you're like, man, they went for a hike. I haven't been for a hike in how long? Well, of course, they haven't been on a hike in 2 years for all you know. But they post it and you're like, man, they've got such a fun life. Oh, look at they post a picture of them cooking dinner. Look how healthy their dinner is. And I just had Taco Bell. Man, I'm such a loser. You have these unrealistic self-images, and neurotics really create these unrealistic expectations. They think this is what they should be like. It's like in their head is their Instagram feed, right? It's like, this is my life should be like all these, false images that I have in my mind about what life should be like. They display what's called a defensive function, which is where they hide behind their idealized self. And they say, oh no, I really am operating at the level of my Instagram feed, right? Like all that stuff. No, that's my true life. That's true. It's like, this is what I should be like. And this is what I'm like. And they really deny that they have these, low self-image problems. They, if anybody says to them, oh, don't beat yourself up, you look great, whatever, they're like, no, I know I do. I know. It's great. I'm fine. No, I don't know where you got the impression that I was, had low self-esteem. I actually have great self-esteem. Like they deny it to everybody else and probably to themselves. They probably don't really want to really acknowledge the negative self-esteem that they're carrying. They chastise themselves for not reaching their idealized self, right? They go, man, I'm such a loser. I didn't get 100% on that test. Oh no, I didn't work out today, and I'm supposed to work out every day. They have these idealized images of what they should be doing, and then they get mad at themselves for not fulfilling it. And that causes them to further reduce their self-image, because they're like, yet again, didn't meet my goals, even though their goals don't make sense, right? They beat themselves up for not having reached those goals. The idealized self basically causes this, what Horney calls the tyranny of the shoulds. And I just love that phrase, I have to say. This idea that, we have these things that we think we should be doing, or we should be able to do, or, other people tell us we should want, or that we should do. And we really get tyrannized by it. We feel like we have to pursue those goals, even if they aren't our own goals. Other people are imposing them on us. Or even if they are goals that maybe we set up for ourselves when we were younger, and adulthood has shown us that those things aren't really probably achievable, and maybe not even desirable now that we see it from another perspective. But our idealized self tells us, no, keep striving for that. Keep working towards it. No matter what anybody else says, or nothing, no matter what any learning you display, it doesn't matter. Keep working towards those goals blindly, neurotically. Keep trying to reach those unattainable goals. Perfection, or sort of Instagram ready at all moments, or whatever it is, right? Like keep striving, do it. And this becomes like there's no pleasure in it at all. There's no sense of accomplishment. There's no sense of pride or happiness in it. There's just this unfulfillable marching towards something that maybe the person doesn't even want, but they feel like they should want it. And I love that phrase, the tyranny of the shoulds, because so often we do internalize what other people have told us we should want, or something that our 10-year-old or 12-year-old self told us we should want. And here we are as an adult going, I can't tell that kid that I didn't fulfill it. I got to keep trying. And we end up not pursuing the things that are honestly the most fulfilling. We instead go for the things that, we're being tyrannized into shoulding, we should do it. All right, let's make a head-to-head comparison between Freud and Horney. Freud says that our anxiety comes from our libido, right? I'm simplifying the aggression and sex parts of the psychic energy that's housed in our id. And we have an ego and our super ego struggling to decide, should we always do the right thing, or should we do sometimes something else based on the reality principle that might actually be pleasurable for ourselves. Horney, on the other hand, says that anxiety comes from social inequalities, and that instead of having an ego-superego struggle, there's a struggle between the self and then the tyranny of the shoulds. Like, should I be honest and forthright and be the person that I am, or should I continue to struggle to strive toward those shoulds? So kind of different. I mean, you could argue that the superego might be a little tyrannical, I guess. So you can definitely see the influence of Freud on Horney. And if you really study her compared to Freud, you can definitely see that she was his student. But you can also see places where she tried to distinguish her thinking from his and to establish a different theory from his. All right, well, that gives you a kind of a brief overview of Horney, and in our next segment, we'll move into Freud's number one favorite follower until he got really mad at him and then he hated him follower, Carl Jung. So I will see you in the next recording for that.